Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
We are moving into not just the last hour of the series that we've been in, but this is the last hour. In fact, this is the last book in the entire Bible on I'm just going to be clear here, a less than 8-year journey. That's how long it took us. From the time that I showed up here, 2014, till now, we have finally made it, well, we've almost made it, all the way through the Bible. Whew! Well done. Yeah, some of you are like, I got here last week. I don't know what you're talking about. Stick around, because in January, we're starting again. But we're going to take a shorter tour this time, because there's just so much ground to cover. We're going to be in 3 John today. And I just want to encourage you, get out your device that has your Bible on it, or get out your real Bible. I mean, they're both real Bibles, whatever. But, get it out, because you're going to have bragging rights at the end of the service today. You will be able to say, I have read an entire book of the Bible. It's only one chapter, but you're still going to be able to say it by the end of the day. So you'll have a little bit of bragging rights, and if you've never read an entire book of the Bible, here's your chance. You ready? Good. Two people are ready. I'm super excited about that. Just to be clear, I grew up in the South. Memphis is my hometown. And in the South, they're a little bit more vocal. It's okay. If you wanted to just say, amen, bring it, come on now, all that's totally acceptable, okay? If you want, get up and run around the building. We call it a Jericho March where I grew up, but you can do whatever. Okay, anyways. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to listen today as a leader, okay? Because John is actually writing his last letter to an individual. In fact, an individual who is a dear friend, an individual who is a leader in the church. But here's what I want you to understand. To varying degrees and in varying spheres of responsibility, every person in this room is called to lead. Now, not those of you who are watching at home in your pajamas. No, everyone listening is actually called to lead. And so I want you to listen to what John has to say, not with someone else in mind, but with your own sphere of influence in mind. Can you do that? Okay, good. Now we're down to one. This is not going the right direction. My title today is The Good, the Bad, and the Up and Coming. Which brings me to the good. How do you know the difference between the good guys and the bad guys? You knew on TV by who wore the white hat. Those were always the good guys. And then the bad guys figured out where they could buy white hats also. And then it got really confusing, right? You ever heard of white hat hackers? Say that 10 times fast. White hat hackers. They're hackers who are the good guys, not the bad guys. And so they develop and hack systems in order to discover their vulnerabilities. They're white hat hackers. I like saying that. Okay, I'm done with that now. How do you tell the difference, though, between the good guys and the bad guys? We have this tendency when we read through the Bible to read it with what I call the good guy hermeneutic or the hero hermeneutic. We're reading each and every story in the Bible, looking for the hero in the story. But if you could settle this in your heart and mind right now, there are no heroes in the Bible other than Jesus. The whole story is about God, and God the Son, God the Father, and God the Holy Spirit. The whole story is about God, and He's the only hero in the whole story. That's why you will discover that some of the individuals who do extraordinary things in God's kingdom, who love the Lord, who are men after God's own heart, are also individuals who are severely flawed as well, because the story isn't about the good guys and the bad guys. The story is about a good God who redeems all of us. But nonetheless, when we're talking about leadership, one of the things that we want to know is, who should we follow? Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And John has this driving theme in all of his letters, and this theme is really summed up in verse 4 of 3 John. There's only one chapter. 3 John 1, verse 4, I could have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Now, he isn't speaking of his biological children, although that is a great joy as well. He's speaking of those that he has discipled or led into the faith. John is a spiritual father to the churches that he's writing to, and he says, my greatest joy is to hear that when I'm not there, the people that I've raised up are continuing to walk in the truth. And I can just tell you as a church planter, having planted a church in Homer, a community that we have loved for years, 27 years we lived in Homer, and being able to invest in those individuals, and now being here and still hearing, hello, being here and still hearing the good reports of lives that are being transformed. That's a joy. That's really what drives John, and that's why he's writing these letters, is so that those that he has led into relationship with Christ would continue to grow and to walk in that relationship. Because the truth is this, children don't walk in the truth unless they have been trained in the truth. It doesn't happen by default. There are a lot of things for us as humans that happen by default. You can read about them in the scriptures, and you can observe them in your own life. But the reality is that children don't just walk in the truth unless they've actually been trained in the truth. In fact, this is a major cultural issue right now in parenting and in education. It's why so many are up in arms over our education system, and it's this, that we want our children to learn truth. John says, there's no greater joy than that my children are walking in the truth. I want to give you 3 types of leaders that John's going to address in this very short 1-chapter book. There are the leaders who love people. When we're talking about spiritual leadership, kingdom leadership, there are leaders who love people. There are leaders who love power. And there are leaders who have potential. Now, I know what you're thinking. Everyone has potential. I would say, what I mean is potential for good. You can see something unique in what they're called to do, who they're called to be, but there are leaders who love people. They're in it for the right reasons. And then there are leaders who love having power and influence. And then there are leaders who have potential, or the good, the bad, and the up and coming. Which brings me to GDP. Gross domestic product, right? It's the complete sum of goods produced in a country, domestically produced in a country, and what is their value? Now, we could do a little bit of an economics lesson, and hopefully some people in government are watching. Okay, that was for free. That wasn't nice, but it was for free. But here's the bottom line is this, that a thriving production in a country equals a thriving economy, and a thriving economy is really dependent on thriving production managers, people who can lead people well, right? People who can inspire, people who can attract people, who can draw them in, who can care for them, who can create longevity in an industry. But what you really need is to identify the right kinds of people. In church terms, I would say there are sort of 2 questions that plague me, and they are these. What have we produced with the resources that we've used? In fact, budget season's coming up rather quickly. And the question that our board is responsible to ask me personally is, Jonathan, what did we produce this year with the money that we spent, with the time that we spent, with the gifting that was spent? What did we actually produce over the course of this year? And then the second question is this: how do we identify leaders who will love people well? Because talent doesn't necessarily tell you that. Gifting is not an indicator of character. Music, programs, facilities, budgets, all of that stuff is absolutely meaningless unless we are developing people. Otherwise, it's just stuff that we're doing. At Church on the Rock, we exist to produce a particular kind of person. That's what we're interested in, not to do particular kinds of programs, but at the end of the day, what our board and our elders want to know is, Jonathan, are we producing people? And so our statement, our mission, our vision is this: Church on the Rock exists to develop people. That's where it begins for us. Not develop programs or processes, but to develop people. And this is the kind of people we want to see develop because we believe it's a biblical kind of person, a disciple of Jesus. We want to develop people who love God, who love others, which I don't know if you noticed, but that can be a little bit of a challenge. In fact, people usually think it's easier to love God than to love others, and that's why John spends so much time tying those two things together. Love God, love others, live in freedom, increasing levels of freedom, and then lead others to that same life in Jesus. That's why we exist as a church. Everything we do, everything we spend should be moving people in that direction. In biblical terms, it's just called disciple making. Which brings me to franchising, which is all the things I know you want to come to church to hear about. Franchising, in a nutshell, is you have an original concept or product developer, and that thing becomes popular, is making money, and other people want to do the same thing in their communities. And so there's a trademark, there are certain copyrights that are owned, and so they petition the originator for the opportunity to be a franchisee. And there are certain rules and boundaries that surround that, but what every successful franchise requires is the ability to identify the right leaders. How many of you have ever been to the same chain store in a totally different community and had an entirely different experience? How many of you have ever been to a church in the same community other than the one you were at before and had an entirely different experience? The reality is that Jesus lays out this model and mission for the church, and what we're doing is joining His Spirit and seeing that reproduced around the world. What's really been surprising to me over the years, though, is that often the people I first think might be great leaders who turn out not to be, and the people that I don't even notice who step on the scene and blow my mind. I call them sleeper agents. Like, really? You turned into that? Like, what? I used to think that the most charismatic, outspoken person in the room was the best leader, except now I realize statistically that is absolutely not true, which means I have a lot to overcome in my own life. The reality is that when you look at Fortune 500 companies, you will discover that the companies that have the best leaders and the highest percentage of CEOs leading those companies are introverts. Come on, introverts, this is one chance, like, woo! You can even do it like this, woo, woo, yeah, go team. It's an introvert cheer. But the reality is that what makes for a great leader isn't charisma, it's character. And that's what John is going to be addressing in this short letter. Now, over the years, I've discovered there's a handful of questions that you can ask someone to discover what kind of leader they may be. The first one is this: what is their history? Like, tell me a little bit of your story. Where did you come from? What have you done? Where'd you come from? Where did you go? Okay. The second one is this: when were they hurt? Tell me a time when someone wounded you. And when you listen to someone describe that moment, you can discover a lot about their character. In fact, often when people show up at church and the very first thing they want to tell me is how terrible the church they came from was, My assumption is, and it's not always true, but my assumption is that it's just a matter of time before you'll be somewhere else telling them how terrible our church is, because you learn a lot about a person by how they process leadership failures, hurts, and wounds. You can discover a lot about how they describe those things. The third one is this: who are their heroes? Who are the people that you look up to? And one of the things I've noticed over the years is when those heroes are people they don't actually know or have any real relationship with. They're internet sensations, they're preaching phenoms, and I discover that the people they're looking up to are not people they're looking up to because of their character, but people they're looking up to because of what they're doing. The last one is this: where is their heart? If you were to ask the question, where do you see yourself in 10 years, and listen to that description, you'll learn a lot about a person. John is going to identify several measures of success in a leader. 3 John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. This letter is from John the elder. I'm writing to Gaius, my dear friend, whom I love in the truth. Dear friend, I hope all is well with you and that you are healthy in body as you are strong in spirit. Some of the traveling teachers recently returned and made me very happy by telling me about your faithfulness and that you are living according to the truth. I could have no greater joy than to hear that my children are following the truth. Let me give you 5 tests of a trustworthy leader. Seriously. 5 tests of a trustworthy leader. Verse 2 picks up the first one. Dear friend, I hope all is well with you and that you are as healthy in body as you are strong in spirit. I'll tell you this much. There is a link between caring for yourself physically and caring for yourself spiritually. Years ago, I was talking with my father-in-law about how to overcome temptations in your life, things like lust and addictions and those kinds of things. And he gave me a really interesting observation from his life. He said, Jonathan, I've discovered over the years that if I would exercise discipline in the little areas of life, I would discover that I would have the discipline necessary in the critical moments in life. These are the illustrations he gave me. He said, not taking a shower as hot as I want for as long as I want. And I thought, that's stupid. We'll move on. The second one he gave me was not eating as much as I want every time I sit down to eat. That one's dumb too. He gave me a list of these things that would be relatively simple things when you looked at them on the surface. And he said, what I discovered in my life is that if I would apply discipline in the small areas of life, when I needed it in the big moments, when I was tempted to gossip or I was tempted to give into lust or some sort of sin, I would find that in those moments I had been developing this muscle of discipline. It was great advice. That being strong in body and strong in spirit actually tend to go hand in hand. If I don't exercise discipline in the small areas of my life, it stands to reason that I would struggle to exercise it in the spiritual areas in my life. Second one is found in verse 3. Some of the traveling teachers recently returned and made me very happy by telling me about your faithfulness and that you are living according to the truth. I love this because he's saying, listen, one of the keys, one of the markers of a leader is that there are good reports about them and they have a good reputation in the community. Those things matter. Will everybody love you? Of course not. But overall, when he hears the report, it's that this person has a good reputation, and I am giving good reports about them. And not only that, but they are faithful in practicing what they preach. That matters. While you can't be in relationship with everyone in the church, I can't be, you can't be, you must be in relationship with someone, with people who actually visit your home, see you interact with your kids in your own space, who get to actually observe your life. And the report that comes back as a result of those interactions should be a good report. Fourth one is found in verse 4. I could have no greater joy than to hear that my children are following the truth. The markers of a good leader, of becoming a good leader, is that you're actually making disciples. I just had a conversation this past week with a pastoral friend here in the community, and somebody had approached this individual about wanting to step into a leadership role. In fact, they wanted to become ordained. They wanted to become a pastor in their church, and they struck up the conversation in that way. And this individual, this pastor's first thought was, why are you waiting on me? Aren't you already doing those things? Aren't you already making disciples? Because the mission that Jesus gave does not require a stamp of approval from our church. It doesn't require an ordination by some organization. You being called to the mission that Jesus called you to, there is nothing holding you back from that. And when you're looking for people in leadership, you're looking for people who are already doing what God has called them to do, not waiting on you to give them permission to do it. It's how we identify elders at our church. We're not looking for people that we're asking to become elders. We're looking for people who are already taking initiative, functioning as elders, and inviting them into that group to give input and advice. The reality is that the mission that Jesus gave out to every single follower is this: go and make disciples. And you should not be waiting on anyone to give you the stamp of approval to go and do that thing. And then the last one is found in verses 5 and 6, 3 John 1, 5 and 6. Dear friend, Gaius, you are being faithful to God when you care for the traveling teachers who pass through, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church here of your loving friendship. Please continue providing for such teachers in a manner that pleases God. I would say one of the key markers of a strong leader is receptivity to outside voices. Not just the voices that agree with them or submit to them, but the ability to invite others in. Not just to speak into their own life, but to speak into the life of the church. When you're around someone that doesn't allow any other voices in, be cautious. He says, here's the report I've gotten from the traveling teachers. First of all, you welcome them in. And we're not just talking about anyone, right? We're talking about people who are teaching the truth. You welcome them in, and not only that, but you extend friendship to them and you help support the ministry that they're engaged in. John's going to end this section with this exhortation regarding traveling speakers and missionaries. Verses 7 and 8, for they are traveling for the Lord, and they accept nothing from people who are not believers. So we ourselves should support them so that we can be their partners as they teach the truth. This is really important. When we're talking about evangelists, when we're talking about those who are preaching the gospel, they are uniquely called to reach those who have not been reached for Christ. And when they're reaching those individuals, they never expect anything from them. In fact, we're told historically that they refused to receive anything from them because they did not want to give the impression that the message of the gospel was for sale. They wanted people to understand that the free gift of God is made available to all. And what John is saying is that we should support people like that, which, by the way, is something you do really, really well as a church. In fact, my sister-in-law, when we were coming back from the Echo Banquet here a few weeks ago and seeing the funds that were raised that night, she made an observation to me that had never really stood out to me before. She said, every fundraiser that I've been to in the past is for that organization. All the work they put in, all the time they put in, and all the funds they raise are for them, which there's nothing wrong with that. I've done that in the past as well. She said, but what's different about this event is none of it is for your church. And I thought, that's true, and that is a little unusual. It never struck me before because it's just what we do. It's what we've done for years and years, but it's this idea that we want to pour out favor and blessing and resource on those who are taking the gospel around the world so that they could do that without having to worry about how they're going to feed their family. It's the same principle that John is addressing here. Which brings me to the bad, the good and the bad. Few of us, and there are those oddballs, but few of us love authority structures. In fact, one of the complaints about the church, the local church these days, is that it is an institution. It's just an organization. And what people really mean is these hierarchical approaches, these leadership structures, and as Alaskans in particular, we really don't like authority structures. It's why we have one of the highest self-employment rates in the nation, because we're all entrepreneurs and you're not the boss of me. Right. But that's human nature. That's all of our tendency. There are a few of us who love authority structures and submitting to leaders, unless, of course, we're the leader. And then we love when people love authority structures and submitting to leaders. But there's one thing that we like even less, and it's this: submitting to bad leadership, which can be a real problem, not only in the workforce, but it can be a real problem in the church as well. So how do you know if the leadership that you're under is good or bad? And I would just make this caveat: good leadership doesn't equal perfect leadership. Good leadership doesn't equal perfect leadership. I get it, it's the expectation we have from leadership, but good leadership doesn't equal perfect leadership. You've probably heard it said before, but if you go into a situation looking for leadership failure, you will get what you're looking for in some form or another. You'll see what you were looking for in some form or another, because all of us fail in some way or another. Good leadership doesn't equal perfect leadership, but it does equal faithful leadership, and it does equal humble leadership, and it does equal loving leadership. And in fact, I tell people frequently that my goal is to be faithful. To be faithful to repent when I get it wrong, to be faithful to lead well by loving my family and others well. My goal is to be faithful, and sometimes that faithfulness shows up in my own family by repenting to my kids for my attitude or my anger. And the reality is that good leadership doesn't equal perfect leadership, but it does equal faithful leadership, and it does equal humble leadership, and it does equal loving leadership. John is going to write about a leader who is none of those things in verses 9 through 10. I wrote to the church about this, but Diotrephes, who loves to be the leader. How you like that? Who loves to be first, is how it reads in some translations. Who loves to be the leader, refuses to have anything to do with us. When I come, I will report some of the things he is doing and the evil accusations he is making against us. Not only does he refuse to welcome the traveling teachers, he also tells others not to help them. And when they do help, he puts them out of the church. You can tell if a leader loves themselves more than they love the people by what they withhold from the people. You can tell if a leader loves themselves more than they love the people by what they withhold from the people. Now, it's worth just pausing here for a moment, because your mind has probably already shifted to some leaders in your life, and I want to redirect your mind to you. Because there's only a small sphere, a little circle of things that we actually have some control over. And John isn't writing this so that you can critique everyone out there. He's writing it so that you and I can grow and develop into the kinds of people he's called us to be as well. You can tell a lot about leaders by what they withhold from the people? Do they avoid apologies? Do they withhold opportunities from others? And do they refuse to give up authority? We have an axiom here at Church on the Rock, one of several little sayings that help us stay focused on what our priorities are. And one of them is this: we never give away responsibility without giving away authority. Because there's nothing more frustrating than being responsible for something and having no authority to make it happen. So if we've given you responsibility in some area, we have by default said you have the authority necessary to bring that responsibility into reality. You can tell a lot about a leader when they withhold opportunities, they withhold apologies, and they withhold authority. I would just say this: if you have been under that kind of leadership or you're prone to that kind of leadership, it's usually from a sense of insecurity or superiority. It's either from a misunderstanding of the gospel and my own desperate need for the same grace that you're in need of, which makes it almost impossible for me to show you grace because I haven't allowed any to be shown to myself. Or it's from a place of deep insecurity and I can't handle the thought of someone else being viewed as better than me. But in either case, run for your life. 3 John 1, verse 11 says, "Dear friends, don't let this bad example influence you." Which, by the way, over time, staying put, refusing to change, it will influence you. Follow only what is good. Remember that those who do good prove that they are God's children, and those who do evil prove that they do not actually know God. Probably heard it said before, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. That isn't like comprehensive. I have friends who are far from Christ and I'm attempting to influence them towards Christ. What it really is saying, though, is this: show me the people who have influence in your life and I'll show you your future. The people that you choose to place yourself around over time will shape your character. That's why the scriptures say that bad company corrupts good character. You and I have both seen it over and over. We've probably experienced it to varying degrees. It says, be careful who you place yourself around. Don't let that kind of bad example influence you. Follow only what is good. Which brings me to the last piece, the up and coming. Third John 1, verse 12. You're almost there. You've almost read a whole book of the Bible, provided you were reading along on the screen. Everyone speaks highly of Demetrius, as does the truth itself. We ourselves can say the same for him, and you know we speak the truth. Everyone speaks highly of Demetrius? Really? Like, I wouldn't mind at all batting 100%, although I don't think that's baseball, is it? It's like 300? What is it? Anybody? I don't even care. Listen, I would love that everyone, but what he's really describing here, what John's really describing, is that the majority of people, and in particular the people who know him well, speak highly of this individual, and so do we. We speak highly of him. But then John adds this little bit. He says, even the truth speaks highly of him. It's an interesting way to say it, isn't it? Like, we speak highly of him, and by the way, even the truth speaks highly of him, as the truth itself does. He says, listen, it's observable. I'm not just telling you he's great. You can observe it in actuality, in his real life, in the way he's actually living. You can observe that this individual has incredible potential. He's one of those people that people are already speaking highly of. You could observe his life for yourself and discover that in truth, he is actually who he claims to be. Like I said at the beginning, talent doesn't trump character. It's a real danger, by the way, in the church. We're looking for talented people in particular areas. Worship leaders, a great example. If someone's got a great voice, they're a songwriter, they can play the instrument, they can even lead a team. What we often look at first is talent. Someone's a great communicator, someone's a great children's ministry director, but when you look at talent first, you often put people in positions of power who are severely lacking in character. And here's what I've discovered over the years. Character shows up in time. It always does. Sometimes it's a long time, sometimes it's a short time, but character, who you actually are, always shows up in time. Because God is gracious. He's allowing who we are to actually be revealed so that we could be transformed. He's allowing who we actually are to be revealed so that you could be informed. But character shows up in time. When I think about talent and I think about character, if you were to envision them like an iceberg, talent is the tip of the iceberg. It's the thing above the surface that everybody can see, but roughly 90% of what really matters is under the surface. What keeps that talent up in its right place is what's down below the surface. And when that character, that thing that's below the surface, who a person actually is, when that character below the surface begins to be eroded over time and gets smaller and smaller, it's only a matter of time before everything is upside down and that severe lack in the area of character is exposed as it rolls to the surface. Character shows up in time. Listen. Good leadership doesn't equal perfect leadership. Good character doesn't equal perfection in every area of life. But in this realm of leading others, in the spheres of influence that you have in your family and in the workplace and in your school and in the church, and all of those spheres of influence, the reality is that what Jesus wants to get to is your heart. Your gifting will make a way for itself in time, but if you would allow Him to shape your character in this moment, then the leader you will become in the days ahead will be one that exceeds your own wildest expectations.
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.